Skoda Kodiaq diesel. Once again, I will repeat my frequent phrase, I love German diesels. Not all, but almost all VAGs are good. Under the hood of the Skoda Kodiaq, a 2.0 TDI unit of the EA288 generation with common rail injection took its place. Purely technically extremely thoughtful modern motor. Innovations from the previous generation of the EA189 diesel engine are a whole encyclopedia. What is not here? A diesel particulate filter complete with a catalyst, a dual-circuit EGR, a variable geometry turbine, and intercooler built into the intake manifold. And it all works as it should, giving its results in traction characteristics and fuel economy. The only thing that is not entirely clear is why the vacuum and oil pumps were combined. So that in which case at once the wedge of the motor and the accident? To make the whole module cost as much as half an engine? Okay, we swear into the void. In fact, the owners have not yet encountered problems from this symbiosis. Of the good news, there is also a turbine. This time, MAHLE was chosen as the manufacturer. Still, she has more resource than Borg-Warner from the previous generation of diesel. Well, let's come to the problems of the 2-liter TDI. The worst thing that has happened to him so far is a major overhaul due to a sudden break in the timing belt. Basically, it all starts with an extraneous sound in the area of U200B. U200B's corresponding mechanism, and usually after the first contact with the dealer, the belt with rollers is simply changed to new ones, and the owner, not knowing about the risks experienced, goes home to drink tea with raspberries. However, there are rare cases when something knocked and a little later tadam happens, the valves come to meet the pistons. That's when tea coffee is already offered at the dealership at the acceptance of a car for a warranty case. The manufacturer acknowledged the problem and promises not to do it again. Of course, I will not pass by the general cases of oil leakage at the junction of the internal combustion engine and gearbox. Here you go. VAG, you again with your oil leaks. When checking a car before buying, I first saw snot in this place at Skoda Kodiaq. The first thing that came to mind was the crankshaft oil seal. Is everything like the Touareg? And no, everything is much more interesting. In fact, the flywheel mounting bolts, or rather the singed sealant, which acts as both fixation and gaskets at the same time, give a leak. Fortunately, dealers in advanced cases dutifully change the bolts for new ones under warranty, which over time begin to snot again. Well, okay, oil leaks are not the worst thing that can happen to a motor. I would forgive this diesel and forgive. Eat butter for health. Cases of similar incidents with 1.4 TSI are known, but they cannot be called massive. 1.4 has its own problems. 1.4 TSI of the EA211 series have long been known for many other cars, including Skoda Rapid, Skoda Octavia, Volkswagen Jetta, about which we already have reviews. It is surprising, of course, that a motor of such a small volume even got under the hood of such a colossus, but let's just take it for granted. Subcompact units have long escaped from under the hoods of cars A and B classes. I don't think it's a good idea to buy a 1.4 TSI Kodiaq because it's loaded. The mass of the car cannot but affect the resource. True, and I will not dissuade him 100% either. For one simple reason, this motor itself is something almost perfect. Economical, high torque, and quite reliable. Yes, 1.4 TSI engines got rid of petty problems. There is no longer a chain here, only a timing belt that can last longer than chains usually live on inline VAG engines. Little things remained in the form of a wedge turbine actuator. The high-pressure fuel pump sometimes knocks out a request to replace the pusher. In general, nonsense, and nothing more. 1.4 CZDA on its life path was also marked by flywheel rattling when idling. Also a well-known VAG trouble, which has been counting its existence for more than a decade, but as you know, this tapping usually does not lead to anything serious. By the way, the flywheel is dual mass and costs a lot of money, so it always makes sense, as they say, to pull to the last, namely, to vibrations on the body and shaking when starting off. At the same time, for a Kodiaq buyer on the secondary market, this tapping is an objective reason to ask the seller to throw off $50 on the flywheel. As for the oil burner, such a question for VAG engines is inappropriate today. Of course, it is, and the reasonable limit is approximately at the border of 1 liter per 10,000 kilometers, although the manufacturer allows such consumption for only 1 TKM. This indicator can be minimized by normal gasoline and periodic piston decarbonization, since CPG has a tendency to carbon formation. True, the 1.4 TSI has even more serious problems, those from which the blood in the veins freezes. It turned out that some of the owners were faced with unscrewing the bolts from the phase regulators. That's fun, right? First, a knock appears during operation, then the sound intensifies, oil begins to flow onto the protection. Romance. Strange, but so far only Kodiaq owners have encountered such an ailment, although the EA211 engine is put on many other VAG models. Maybe an information dump? Still to be known. When buying a Skoda Kodiaq with 1.4, it is also worth remembering a rather complex multi-circuit cooling system, the main part of which is the pump and thermostat unit. It happens that it fails or starts to leak. In this case, the block changes only in the collection and, of course, for decent money. As for the version of the EA211 engine named CZEA with the half-cylinder deactivation system, uneven wear of the camshaft cams takes place during operation, which in principle is expected and natural. All the money you save on gas will go towards replacing the camshafts as a surcharge. The petrol 2-liter 2.0 CZPA of the EA888 series shines on warranty repairs less often for one simple reason: Skoda Kodiaq with this engine is more expensive than everyone else, so they are not bought so often. Naturally, he also has some weak points. For example, a chain. Although she managed to increase her resource to 150 TKM, it's still, you see, quite a bit in order to call her eternal. Most of all, in the latest generation of the EA888 Gen 3B motor, cases of failure of the oil pump with a 2-stage pressure control system are alarming. Naturally, in this case, the hand of hunger for oil reaches the upper parts of the internal combustion engine, primarily lifting up the camshaft supports. And in the practice of checking a car before buying, I have already come across cars with the same problem with the pump and the consequences of its failure. The only thing was not with the Kodiaq. With the Audi A6 with the engine of the same series, the pump on the 2-liter gasoline Skoda Kodiaq turned out to be not ready for high operating temperatures, the body warps over time and the antifreeze gets the will to free fall to protect the engine. Yes, Skoda Kodiaq is the kind of car that you should sometimes look under for leaked working fluids. Otherwise, the 2.0-liter TSI CZPA is relatively trouble-free and pleases with good and even traction and, unlike many other versions of the EA888, very moderate oil consumption. True, diesel is still better. With gearboxes, the Skoda Kodiaq is simple. Either you trust only yourself when choosing a manual transmission, or you step over stereotypes about DSG problems and delegate the responsibility for changing speeds to a robot. With the mechanics, in principle, everything is clear and without explanation, there are no problems with it. But these three ominous letters DSG often cause panic attacks. Someone may have other mental illnesses, including incontinence of foul language, after remembering the problems that people from the internet fell upon their heads when operating a car with this box. But let's dispel the most important prejudice about direct shift gearboxes. DSG is always a problem. No. Forget this stupid myth. Stupid for one simple reason: the VAG robot is not one box or even three. There are dozens of very different designs and reliability. And, even despite the fact that the robot is different, even within the Kodiaq aggregate line, the overall picture of ownership will be approximately the same and, most importantly, very positive. We will not take into account the still appearing cases of marriage of mechatronics. For example, you have chosen Skoda Kodiaq with 1.4 TSI engine. Congratulations, you have a wet 6-speed DSG DQ250 with 2 wet clutches. All that owners encounter in the first 200 TkM is jolts when shifting a number of gears. In most cases, kicks are treated with a banal firmware change, which VAG updates at regular intervals. Then, perhaps, you will change the clutch kit and you will continue to rejoice, continuing to change the oil in the box. With all other engines, the DSG DQ500 will work, which will only puzzle you with clicks when switching modes. Fortunately, these sounds, as in the case of DQ250 kicking, do not lead to anything serious. As some representatives of the official Skoda dealerships say, "Don't listen to me." And, of course, you should not forget about the sensitivity to the purity of the oil. The lubricant is continuously filled with clutch friction where products and these particles sooner or later make themselves felt. Oil leaks. Where without them? Hanging drops under the hood of the all-wheel drive Skoda Kodiaq can be seen not only on the engine and gearbox connector, but also on the angular gearbox, which motorists mistakenly used to call the razdatka. The transmission oil finds its way out at the junction of the housing halves. The reasons are called different. Someone talks about defective bolts, someone blames the sealant again, but the result is the same. Dealers also meekly change the gearbox, and the new assembly is already without inherent problems. The connection of the rear wheels when the front wheels slip is controlled by the Kodiaq Generation 5+ clutch. During normal operation, it serves flawlessly. It is only necessary to change the oil at the same frequency as in the robot, that is, every 30 to 40 TkM. The weakest point of the chassis is the wheel bearings. Up to 100,000 kilometers have to be buried one by one, especially near the highway cars. All other chassis nodes can be called tenacious, at least before reasonable limits. With a normal driving style, nothing falls off. Let's take a quick look at the design. Front classic McPherson on the triangular lever. Least of all here, as usual, the stabilizer struts walk. Silent blocks of levers are easily able to drive 150 to 200 TkM. The rear part of the Kodiaq was taken over by a multi-link suspension, the overhaul of which is not worth planning before 200 TkM. But the steering system let us down a little. Many owners, even on short runs, encountered knocks from the front when driving through sharp bumps or when shaking the steering wheel from side to side. You can safely blame the steering rack, or rather the steering shaft sleeve, as the culprit of the drum roll in front. While the car is under warranty, dealers replace it for free. In other cases, you have to look for specialists in steering systems. Fortunately, the node is quite maintainable, so you won't need a lot of money to return peace and tranquility. About the brakes, oddly enough, there is also something to say. Don't worry, exhale, hoses don't tear or bulge, pads don't fly off. Everything is not so serious, you can't even call it a breakdown. It just happens that the rear brake discs wear unevenly. As you know, poor quality pads are most often the culprit in such cases. It all happened. Dealers changed clutches under warranty. Business something. To date, the trend is relentless. Cars are gradually turning into gadgets. And all such devices, as we know, are sometimes buggy, that is, they acquire floating faults. Turned off and on, everything worked. With new Skodas, especially in fat trim levels, something similar sometimes happens. For example, the sound of the audio system disappeared. The car stood overnight, I thought, but in the morning it was as if nothing had happened. As you probably guessed, we are talking specifically about the Skoda Kodiaq. The problem with the steering column block occurs in a similar way, only patterns are already traced here. After a long period of inactivity, especially in winter, the cruise control and the signal stop working. After a restart, most often everything returns to normal. However, a corresponding error is registered in the steering column electronics ECU. Fundamentally, these glitches are solved only by replacing the block with a new, modified one, although it is obvious that many simply clog and forget. In the same way, the dashboard display may go out and light up again, and ERA GLONASS error will appear. Sometimes ERA has to change the entire assembly, which costs some ridiculous money. The same can happen with the passenger airbag deactivation function and with the blind spot monitoring system. At this rate, cars will mostly be repaired in the same place where you take your broken laptop or tablet, especially when everyone switches to electric cars. Everything that we have already talked about is actually far from the most popular and discussed problems of the Skoda Kodiaq. Most of the attention was deservedly taken over by cases of completely causeless self-destruction of the rear window. This is when you just stand next to the car, you understand that now absolutely nothing is happening and nothing threatens your car, and the glass of the trunk lid just takes and crumbles from Kodiaq. Glass defect. This is the name of the main version of the reason for what is happening. Moreover, only cars with Sicecam glasses were seen in this behavior. Eminent AGC glasses do not allow themselves this, though they are more expensive. I think the owners are willing to pay a little more, just not to worry about the fact that one day the glass crumb can completely unexpectedly cover everything that is in the trunk. Everything else may seem like a trifle to you, but it's still better to familiarize yourself with all the weak points of the Skoda Kodiaq before you buy it on the secondary market. For example, many did not like the fact that the shockproof door linings, when opening and closing, shove the paint on the body. That is, the neighbor's car is well protected from you, while your own car locally loses its paintwork. It's like kissing a black foot when you're a normal white person, just working and developing. Real miracles or just tricks happen with rear lighting. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the reason for the entry of representatives of the insect order into the internal cavities of the rear lights. The front optics are practically problem-free, except for the fact that LED headlights can have bouts of clouding of the lens after the condensate dries in it. Skoda Kodiaq has been on sale for a long time to understand how it winters in our climate. Overall, not bad. But the rear is haunted again. In cars with an electric trunk lid, the door may jam in winter, it may not close or open. Most often, to eliminate it, you just have to wait for warming. Again, in winter, the opening button usually also fails. And finally, let's move to the salon. Many journalists who reviewed the Skoda Kodiaq had the honor to scold the interior materials, accusing them of excessive clumsiness and rigidity. I cannot but agree with this. Indeed, the materials are rustic and this has left its mark on the picture of ownership. All this has led to the fact that the crickets feel at home. There is nothing to imagine such a house for small living creatures. Probably, one cannot find a Kodiaq that has passed 30 to 40 TKM and whose internal door handles would not creak during this period. Accordingly, the pads have to be dismantled, treated with anti-creak materials, and put back together, nostalgic for the domestic auto industry. Most importantly, not everyone will guess that this is not the end. Over time, hard plastic makes itself felt in other places of the interior trim. As for the wear resistance of interior elements of a large check, with age and mileage, the materials show themselves extremely worthy. Even after 100,000 kilometers, the upholstery of the steering wheel, seats, and other elements look, if not new, then quite a bit shabby. In the practice of selecting and checking used cars, Kodiaqs with twisted mileage come across very rarely for two main reasons. 1. The model is relatively fresh. 2. Mileage on the latest VAGs is very difficult to correct due to the security of the dashboard. One way or another, there are craftsmen and those who are not averse to changing the dashboard. You can bring such a seller to clean water with the help of high-quality computer diagnostics. The mileage data is recorded in the engine control units, gearbox, onboard network, and ABS. Here we come to the most interesting question: is it worth looking at a used Kodiaq at all? As you are probably already used to, reading my reviews about various VAGs, and not only, it is impossible to give an unambiguous answer to such a question. It all depends on the chosen bundle of units and on what priorities you have regarding the car. What should be said in general? In general and on average, Skoda Kodiaq requires some attention and scrupulousness in car maintenance from the owner, which in principle describes the picture of many models of the Czech brand. There are few broken cars on sale, since the target audience and the Kodiaq are very similar to the Volvo 1, calm, family, vigilant. For the same reason, technically advanced options also come across infrequently. That is, it is not so difficult to find a truly live copy. The best choice in all plans would be a 2.0 TDI diesel with a DQ500 robot. If the budget allows you to consider this version, then it is better to choose it. We found a good option, bought it, and immediately, without looking at the service history, we changed the timing belt, oils, filters, liquids, and enjoy a large check for a few more years. A similar situation will be with the 2-liter version of the 2.0 TSI. I will not dissuade her. If you have an adequate answer to the question, why is it needed if there is a diesel engine, then the flag is in your hands. Take it and don't worry. But with 1.4 TSI, the situation is ambiguous. The motor itself is good, it showed itself perfectly on other models, but in my opinion, a large Kodiaq is too tough for him. The only reason to buy such a car with 1.4 is an exclusively urban environment or a very retired driving style. True, if we also take into account that very strange cases with unscrewing bolts have appeared here, then it's probably better to save up for the version with 2.0, whether it's diesel or gasoline.